Jonathan Hale stepped off the worn wooden steps of the general store and looked out over the small frontier settlement that had become his new home. The late afternoon sun glowed warm on the dust-covered buildings, and the sound of horses' chatter and the soft hum of everyday life floated through the warm Arizona air. It had been only 3 months since he arrived in the territory, yet many people already knew his name, not because he was important, but because he treated everyone, settlers, traders, travelers, and the local native families, with the same calm respect he believed all humans deserved. Jonathan had grown up in a quiet town far away, where he learned early that kindness traveled farther than anger. Here, however, he discovered quickly that life was more complicated. People often spoke with tension, suspicion, or fear. There were misunderstandings between settlers and native groups, and worries about land, resources, or simple miscommunication. Jonathan tried to help where he could, always hoping that clear words and patient listening would make life a little easier. Earlier that week, through a slow and gentle conversation, he had helped settle a small disagreement between some ranchers and a nearby Apache family. The ranchers believed their cattle had wandered too close to Apache land, while the Apache family believed the ranchers were ignoring their boundaries. Jonathan offered to bring both sides together. He translated concerns, shared calm explanations, and reminded both groups that peace was easier to keep than rebuild. Little by little, the tension faded, ending with handshakes and a quiet understanding. Jonathan did not think much about it afterward. To him, it was simply the right thing to do. But in the following days, he noticed people looking at him differently. Some nodded to him with approval. Others whispered among themselves. He assumed it was nothing until the morning that changed everything. He was repairing a loose hinge on his small cabin door when he saw 3 ranchers riding toward him. Their horses kicked up soft clouds of dust as they approached. Jonathan straightened, brushing wood shavings off his shirt. He expected a question, a greeting, or maybe a request for supplies. Instead, the men exchanged a strange look before stepping aside. Behind them stood 2 young girls. They were twins no older than 14 or 15. Their long dark hair was braided neatly, and they wore simple dresses that were clean, but clearly not their own. They stood close together, their shoulders touching gently as if drawing strength from one another. Their faces were calm, but their eyes carried a quiet depth that made Jonathan pause. One of the ranchers cleared his throat proudly, as if presenting a prize. "We brought you something," he said with a smile. "A reward." Jonathan blinked in confusion. "A reward? For what?" "For helping us with that whole land misunderstanding," the man replied. "We figured you deserved something special. These girls were found a while back, and we're giving them to you. They're yours now." The words struck Jonathan with a cold shock. He felt the ground tilt beneath him for a moment. He looked at the girls standing quietly, heads lifted, their dignity unshaken. They did not look frightened, only resigned, as if this moment was something they had faced before. Jonathan's heart tightened. Never in his life had he imagined being placed in such a situation. He felt the weight of the men's expectations and the girls' calm, unreadable expressions. In that moment, Jonathan realized something important. Refusing rashly in front of the ranchers could put the twins in danger. The ranchers clearly believed they were doing something generous. Jonathan took a slow breath. "Thank you," he said gently, though his voice felt stiff. "Let me speak with them." He stepped toward the twins with quiet steps. They watched him closely, not moving back, not moving forward. Up close, he could see the delicate strength in their features, their straight posture, the slight lift of their chins, the steady silence that held more courage than most people's shouting. "My name is Jonathan," he said softly, keeping his tone gentle. "I don't wish to cause you any trouble. Do you understand English?" The twin on the left blinked slowly and shook her head. The other gave a small shrug, uncertain. They understood a little, perhaps, but not enough to follow everything. Jonathan nodded. "It's all right," he whispered. "I will not harm you." The ranchers behind him shifted impatiently, unaware of his inner conflict. Jonathan knew he needed to act carefully. He turned and thanked the men once more, not because he appreciated their action, but because he feared provoking them. They tipped their hats, satisfied, and rode off. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Jonathan finally let out a long breath. The twins were still standing by his porch, waiting silently. Jonathan faced them again and placed a hand gently over his heart, a gesture of sincerity. He pointed to himself. Jonathan, then, with patient eyes, he gestured toward them. The girl on the left hesitated, then rested her hand lightly on her chest. Nalin, she said quietly. The other twin copied the gesture. Nelly. The names felt soft and musical on Jonathan's tongue as he repeated them. Both girls exchanged a small glance, perhaps surprised he tried to say their names properly. Jonathan motioned toward the shade of his porch. Please, rest. He stepped back to give them space. They followed slowly, sitting together on the wooden steps. Their shoulders were still touching. They never drifted apart more than a few inches. He brought them fresh water and a small plate of bread and fruit, placing it respectfully beside them without forcing. They studied the offerings for a moment before taking them. Nalin took a tiny bite first, and when she found it safe, Nelly followed. Jonathan sat a short distance away, careful not to crowd them. He wanted them to feel safe. As the afternoon stretched on, the warmth softened, and a gentle breeze rustled through the tall grass near his cabin. The twins quietly observed everything: the trees, the sky, Jonathan's simple tools, even the birds resting on his fence. Their eyes were not dull or fearful. They were alert, watchful, thoughtful. Jonathan wondered about their story. Who were their parents? Where had they lived? How long had they been away from their home? He could not ask directly, but he hoped someday they might tell him. For now, he focused on something more immediate. They needed comfort, safety, and understanding. He brought out a small sketchbook and began drawing simple pictures: trees, mountains, rivers, hoping the images might help them communicate. The girls exchanged looks of curiosity. Jonathan drew a circle for the sun, then pointed to the sky. The twins nodded. Then he drew two small figures standing beside a mountain. He looked at them questioningly. Nalin leaned closer and pointed at the mountain, then tapped the sketchbook lightly. She said a word in her language, soft, flowing, impossible for Jonathan to repeat exactly. But he understood she was telling him something important. They came from a place near the mountains. The connection was small, but it was a beginning. As evening approached, Jonathan brought blankets to the porch. He did not want them to fear being forced indoors, so he let them choose. They sat together, wrapped in warmth, watching the sky turn gold, then orange, then a deep, peaceful purple. Jonathan sat inside by the window, leaving the door open so they would not feel shut out. He listened to the quiet. Not once did the girls speak loudly or show distress. They were calm in a way that spoke of deep inner strength. And Jonathan knew something with absolute clarity. There was no way he would let anyone treat them as less than human. He had accepted them that morning only because he feared what others might do if he refused. But now that they were under his protection, he felt a responsibility. A promise forming inside him. He would find a way to return Nalin and Nelly to their people. No matter how long the journey, no matter how many conversations, careful choices, or nights of planning it required. As the first stars appeared in the wide Arizona sky, the twins finally relaxed enough to lean their heads gently against each other. Jonathan watched them from the doorway, his heart full of quiet determination. He did not choose this situation, but he knew he would choose what came next. He would choose compassion. He would choose courage, and he would choose freedom for the two young sisters who had been brought to his doorstep that morning with no say in their fate. The night settled peacefully around the small cabin, marking the beginning of a journey Jonathan never expected, but one he knew he must walk with kindness and care. Jonathan woke early the next morning, the first rays of sunlight coloring the sky a soft pink. Before stepping outside, he paused at the door and looked toward the porch. Nalin and Nelly were still there, wrapped in their blankets, asleep with their heads resting lightly against each other's shoulders. Seeing them like that, peaceful, calm, trusting the quiet of the early morning strengthened his resolve. He stepped out gently, making sure not to startle them. The twins stirred slowly, blinking awake as the morning light touched their faces. When they saw him, they didn't shrink back or move away. Instead, they simply sat upright, their expressions calm and observant. Jonathan offered them a warm smile and a small breakfast bread warmed on the fire, and water fresh from the well. They accepted it politely, eating in small, slow bites. Though they did not say much, their quiet behavior was full of meaning. They were watching him closely, learning who he was after breakfast. Jonathan brought out his sketchbook again. He hoped it would help him learn more about their home. He drew a mountain, then a river, then a few trees. Nalin leaned forward and tapped the page, repeating the soft words she had said the previous evening. Nayeli added another word, pointing to the direction where the sun rose. Jonathan listened carefully. He couldn't repeat the words perfectly, but he tried. The twins exchanged a small smile, barely a movement, but enough to show encouragement slowly. Through drawings and gestures, Jonathan pieced together the truth. Nalin and Nayeli had been separated from their family many days ago. They came from a valley near a mountain range, and they had been trying to return home ever since. Jonathan looked at their drawn map, simple, childlike shapes mixed with his own careful lines. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him a direction, and that was enough. He placed a hand gently over his heart and then pointed to them. "I will help you," he said softly. The twins looked at each other, unsure at first. Perhaps they wondered if they could trust him that deeply. But after a quiet moment, Nalin nodded slowly. Nayeli followed with a tiny nod of her own. They understood. Jonathan spent the day preparing carefully. He packed simple food, 2 extra blankets, and his water flask. He checked his small horse, brushing its coat until it shone gently in the sunlight. When he glanced back toward the porch, Nalin and Nayeli were watching him quietly. They did not ask questions, but their eyes held a mixture of hope and uncertainty. In the afternoon, Jonathan led them toward the edge of the settlement. He kept his steps slow and calm, letting them walk side by side. The twins stayed close to each other, as they always did, moving with quiet unity. A few settlers watched from a distance, whispering, but Jonathan kept his focus on the open land ahead, not the opinions behind him. Once they reached the long stretch of desert leading toward the mountains, the settlement faded behind them. The open sky stretched wide and peaceful, and the gentle wind carried the soft smell of desert plants. Jonathan turned to the girls. "We go together," he said, pointing ahead. Nalin held Nayeli's hand, and both nodded. They began their journey. The first days were simple but careful. Jonathan taught the twins small English phrases: water, rest, safe, while they taught him gentle words from their own language. Sometimes they would laugh quietly when he mispronounced something, but it was a warm kind of laughter, not unkind. It was the first time he had seen them smile without hesitation. At night, they camped near small clusters of trees or beside low hills that shielded them from the wind. Jonathan always made sure the twins had the warmest blankets. The girls, noticing this, shared one blanket with him on the colder nights, placing it near him silently while he slept. It was their way of returning kindness without using words. Each morning, the sun rose higher behind them as they moved closer to the mountains. The journey was peaceful, but not easy. The days were warm, the earth dry beneath their feet, and water was precious. Still, they managed, supporting each other with quiet understanding. During one evening rest, Nayeli pointed toward a cluster of distant trees in the direction of the mountains. She spoke a soft word, tapping her chest gently. Jonathan listened and repeated the word back, though imperfectly. Nalin giggled softly for the first time since he had met her. Her laughter was light, like a soft bell ringing in the quiet air. Jonathan felt warmth in his heart at the sound. He knew they were getting closer. The next day, as they were walking along a shallow valley, Nalin suddenly paused. She touched Nayeli's arm, and both stood absolutely still. Their eyes narrowed with concentration, as if listening to something far away. Jonathan watched quietly, trusting their instincts. After a moment, Nalin pointed toward a narrow path where the land rose gently. She spoke a word he didn't know, but he understood the meaning from her expression. "We are near." Jonathan nodded and followed them carefully. They walked slowly now, not out of fear, but because every step carried the hope of returning home. As the sun settled low in the sky, painting the horizon in soft orange, something changed in the air. The sound of footsteps, light, quiet, control, came from behind the rocks ahead. The twins stopped again, but they did not look frightened. Instead, their eyes softened with recognition. Jonathan's heart beat faster, not from fear, but from uncertainty. He knew this moment was important. From behind the rocks, a group of Apache scouts stepped into view. They moved quietly and gracefully, their expressions serious, but not threatening. They studied Jonathan with careful eyes, trying to understand who he was and why he was with two young members of their community. Before Jonathan could speak, Nalin stepped forward. She lifted her hands gently and began speaking rapidly in her language. Her voice calm but full of emotion. Nayli added her own words, her expression firm and clear. Jonathan stood still, letting the girls explain. He kept his posture open, his hands loose at his sides, showing he meant no harm. He did not know what the scouts were saying, but he trusted the twins completely. The scouts listened closely. Their expressions softened as they recognized the twins' voices and understood their words. One of them stepped forward and placed a hand gently on Nalin's shoulder, then on Nayli's. A warm relief washed over the twins' faces. They were home. One of the scouts approached Jonathan. Though the man spoke little English, his expression carried gratitude. He nodded deeply, a respectful, heartfelt gesture that said more than words ever could. Jonathan returned the nod with equal respect. Nalin and Nayli turned to Jonathan. For the first time since he had met them, they stepped forward without hesitation and wrapped their arms around him. It was a gentle embrace, soft, warm, full of unspoken thanks. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, moved by the depth of their gratitude. When they stepped back, their eyes shone with peace. They said his name softly, Jonathan, their voices filled with meaning. He smiled at them, though his heart felt both full and heavy. He knew this was goodbye, but he also knew it was the right ending. The scouts led the girls down the path toward their community. Nalin and Nayli looked back at him one last time, their faces calm and grateful. Jonathan watched until they disappeared behind the trees and rocks, knowing they were safe, surrounded by family, free to continue their lives with dignity. As the quiet of evening settled around him, Jonathan turned back toward the long road home. He felt tired, but peaceful. He had made no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures, only simple choices guided by kindness and respect. And those choices had made all the difference. He walked into the setting sun, carrying with him the memory of two brave sisters who had changed his heart and ways. He would remember for the rest of his life. He had set out to help them return home. Instead, they helped him become someone better.